All right, we're just going to give people a moment to get their audio settled in before we begin. So I'll give it a few seconds here. All right, and we'll make sure that this is typed out for everybody that's coming in a little bit later, but in the interest of time, I'll get started with just the technical overview. For those of you that haven't joined us for a coffee break or an ACRO webinar before, this platform is Zoom webinar, not Zoom meeting. And that means that your cameras and your microphones will be disabled throughout the entire meeting itself. So if you have a question or if you want to discuss, there are two ways you can do so. We actively encourage you to use the chat. Make sure if you want everyone to see your message that you select all panelists and attendees there. We're going to ask you to use it at various points throughout the webinar to provide some feedback and some clarification. And we'd love it if you would talk amongst yourselves as well. If you have a question for a specific panelist or for the panel in general, the Q&A is going to make it a lot easier for us to manage that. So if you do have a specific question, use the Q&A. But for everything else, the chat is perfectly fine. The other thing is you can actually, because we have a number of panelists on the call today, there should be a stacked column of video feeds in your window. If you hover to the top of that, you'll see a different boxes laid out. So you can change by selecting the small box, you can make it just the active speaker window. During the actual Q&A, you might want to change that to the grid option, which will show everybody, or you can just leave it as it is now. But you can switch up how the webinar looks to you. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Julia Finocchi.
Think you're muted, Julia.
All right, try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can, yep. Perfect.
I just didn't have my earphones in good. So good afternoon and happy Friday, everyone. We're glad you're here. I'm Julia Finocchi, Associate Director at ACRO, and with me is Leslie Eicher, past President of TISEP, the Association of International Credential Evaluation Professionals. We'd like to welcome you to our coffee break to discuss the International Admissions Office. This is an opportunity for ACRO and TISEP colleagues to discuss important and timely topics in a more casual and interactive environment. We know that all of you are incredibly busy, so we thank you for joining us as you close out your week. As always, we are hopeful that our technology will not fail us. This is a very large Zoom webinar, and we at ACRO remain at the mercies of our home Wi-Fi. We encourage you to use the chat function once again freely while on the webinar. However, again, if you have a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A section to ask that rather than the chat, and we will get it into the Q&A for you. Please note which panelist you are asking if the question is specific for them. While our in-person meetings have been suspended in the near term, ACRO and TISEP know that you and your staff continue to have professional development needs. Our associations will help you to do your jobs now by continuing to offer online program that you need. ACRO and TISEP are here to help.
That's right, Julia. We are in a profession that benefits so much from the sharing of information. In fact, that's how today's topic and this International Admissions Roundtable actually got started. We'll talk about the genesis of that in a minute, but first I would like to introduce our panelists to you. So joining us today are Diana Henze, Head of Admissions at the University of Amsterdam and Vice President of Standards at TISEP. Mary Blunt, Senior Foreign Credential Evaluator in Graduate Admissions at Georgia State University. Polly Tohanu at the University of Idaho. Michelle Barger, Associate Director of International Admissions at Wichita State University. And Francesca Villa, Academic Registrar Manager at Istituto Europeo del Design. Thank you all for joining us, panelists. This week, we've celebrated International Education Week around the globe. And while this year has been filled with challenges, One of the silver linings we found is the way that it's brought us in closer communication and support of one another in our work. For those of you who participated in the month-long virtual TICEP conference, we are sure you experienced this too. In fact, it was during that time in the month of October that Deanna Henze got this ball rolling by posting a question on the TICEP listserv. She asked to get a discussion going among colleagues about how their international admissions office was set up at their various institutions. Deanna wanted input on crafting an efficient and user-friendly process to handle the credential evaluation part of the international admissions process. The question itself generated a lot of interest and a lot of comments, and we realized that this was a topic that was of interest to many of our colleagues. So each of our panelists today actually was one of the persons that replied to Deanna's question on the TICEP listserv, and that's why we invited them to be part of our discussion today. In order to bring the topic to a wider audience, ACRO jumped in and said, these are our people as well. This topic is of interest to our ACRO members. So that's how we all landed here today. And I'd like to remind you that this isn't so much a presentation as a conversation among colleagues. So again, I'll encourage you to use the chat function to talk among audience members and the Q&A to pose your questions to the presenters. So let's get this going to be a very interactive discussion today. Now we would like to bring a couple of polls up for you to answer so that we can get an idea of where our interests are in our situations.
And I'll leave this up for a minute or so, or until we have around 70% or so people respond. And sometimes I have Jeopardy music queued up, but unfortunately I wasn't able to get that in my other browser.
Too bad.
All right, I'll leave it up for another 10 seconds here. There we go. Lots of people in centralized office there.
Interesting, and then kind of evenly split among the other options.
Some interesting input in the chat as well. All right. Question.
Yeah, we have a few there. I'll leave this one up for another 30 seconds. Or until we get about 70% of people vote. All right, 10 seconds. This one is another relatively even split.
Interesting, and it just goes to show you that we're kind of all over the place in how our offices are structured. All right. Thank you for that. Julia, are we ready to move into panelist presentations?
Absolutely.
All right, Deanna, can we lead with you?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Everybody's fine with hearing me? Oh, thank you.
Great.
Well, thanks all for joining. I indeed posed a question, and I'll explain to you why. We started an admissions project in 2016, remember? That's a long time ago, and we're still not there yet. And what are we? We are the University of Amsterdam. We have about 2,000 international students each year and 20,000 and 20,000 Dutch. And a lot of master and bachelor programs, and they were all the admissions of all these programs were arranged at different offices. So we had 100 offices and 10 big admissions offices, and they all did something different. So when a student applied for one bachelor and again at another one, they had to use different systems, and they usually got different credential evaluation results. So we thought this is not going to happen anymore. We have to do something. We have to create standards, efficient admissions process, and more quality assurance. Next slide, please, Samar. So we went through the complete student journey. What is a student? What does it do? Well, first you recruit it, then it's the admissions, credential evaluation, right until it's an alumni. So we focused on these two, admissions and equivalency determination. Next slide. So now how did we go about? We were pretty sure that there would have been a lot of resistance if we just decided to pick everybody up and placed it in one central office. So we started this project and traced all the relevant stakeholders, got them together in small groups and worked through a student journey from the beginning, from a student applying until he's registered. We looked at the diversity, transparency of the information. Where is the information for students? Is it everywhere on the website? Is there one place where they can go to? And then we did something which was really, I don't have the pictures anymore, but I should have shown it. We took these tables where when you remove your wallpaper and you place new wallpaper, you have these long tables, and we just printed all the communication a student gets from the beginning, from applying until the registration. It was like a pile of messages, and they were like overlapping, and there were like big gaps here and there. And we thought like, no, we really have to do something here. So then we discussed with all the stakeholders, what would we want? What would an admissions offer do? What should it look like? And we did this with all the stakeholders because we also want to get them on board, of course. So next slide. And this is Dutch, but in the left, it's the happy student, and in the right down, it's the happy employee. So we made this kind of chart. What are the most focus points we should do? It should be an easy process. It should be like Amazon.com. You order sneakers, you get your sneakers. And for the employee, it should be like not repetitive. If a student applies for different programs, you should do the credential evaluation once. So we set a lot of goals which we wanted to get to. So next slide. Those were our main focuses. One point of entry, one application system. And here is where we went a little bit wrong, because we immediately focused on the system, and well, we didn't really buy, but we made like a new system, and we didn't actually look at the complete process that deeply first. So actually you first have your process and then you fit it to your system, but we did a bit the other way around. And another focus was consistent credential evaluation, of course, and clear and transparent norms of quality and lead times and all these kind of things. And another important thing was a connection between the different relevant processes, like student who applies, who needs a visa, has to go to the visa, needs a room, all these, it was all different. It was all in different departments. And then, of course, faster handling of applications, and with the idea behind it that we all have more time for a personal approach. So what did we do? Next slide. Well, we started setting up a new centralized admissions team, mainly for the bachelors. And And we've done this for a few years now. It's up and running for, well, I think about 3 years, but 1 year in one team. And this meant, of course, that all these different departments had to let go. And that was not a real easy process, as you can understand, because there were some departments who we always did it this way, and why should we do it that way? All these kind of resistance you get. And we harmonized processes, like one set of entrance requirements for languages, by example. We organized trainings, and staff had to change departments. So it was really a difficult process. I have to say, it's working now, but it was a difficult process to go through. And next slide. And after we had this up and running, we did a user experience poll at one of our introduction days, just to see what because you do this for the students, not only for yourself as an admissions office. And they were actually quite okay. As you can see, there were a lot of students who were quite satisfied with the lead times, and they were a bit nervous if they would be accepted or not. But we were, well, this part of it is quite okay. Next slide, please. But then we're a few years later, and we're still not there yet, because we still have a lot of graduate schools, which are all in different systems, and not all in different systems, but there are different systems, and we're still busy with getting a real good grip on the quality assurance. What we did with the bachelor now, we had an internal audit, and we have the controllers looking with us, like, is the process really a neat process? Is it efficient? Are we honest? Are we transparent? So the undergraduates are well on their way, but we're still busy with the graduate schools. And that's why I posed this question, like, how do you organize it? Is it all in one office, or how do you go about? I think this was my last slide, actually. Yes, then I'd like to give the floor to Mary.
Great, thanks, Tiana. And thanks everybody for being here. I appreciate y'all having me on the panel, and I'm real excited about this discussion. I'm from Georgia State University. I'll give you a little bit of information about Georgia State first, if you could go on to the next slide, please. So we are the largest public institution in the state of Georgia, with over 54,000 total students. I represent the graduate school, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We have 7,500 graduate students and 1,400 international students, and we do receive about over 5,000 applications a year for international applicants. If you could go on to the next slide, I'll tell you about how we're structured. So similar to you, Deanna, we started I wasn't here for this, but I've come on since then, but we started a whole reorganization and a restructure. So initially, we did not have a graduate admissions. So about 3 years ago, we too went through a similar process, and we have undergraduate admissions, which is separate from graduate, and then we have our graduate school, and within the graduate school is the Office of Graduate Admissions. So we have about 9 to 12 colleges and schools that also are part of the admissions process. So the graduate school basically oversees the CRM. We use Slate. We handle the admissions technology. We handle all the collection of materials, and we do the credential evaluations for the entire school, with the exception of the College of Law. The graduate admissions office does do some decision releases, but there are some still at some of the different colleges and schools. And one of the things that we do is set the institutional admissions policies. Now, the college and programs are responsible for setting their deadlines, their program requirements, and they do the admissions reviews, and they make their decisions. And then we have a separate office for the visa and immigration, that's ISSS. And needless to say, we do all work together, but we are separate organizations. Next slide. So for the in-house, we do mostly in-house evaluations, and my colleague Marita and I do in-house degree equivalency evaluations. There are certain programs that require a professional evaluation, and we kind of manage those, but that is a separate requirement. There aren't many. It's usually a certification type program. And then we might request a professional evaluation if our team is unable to determine equivalency. And that's basically it in a nutshell for how Georgia State is structured. And thanks for your time.
Hello, I'm Polly. I'm the assistant director for the Graduate Admissions Office at the University of Idaho. I was one of the first one that actually reacted to Deanna's question, and mainly because I started out working at the University of Idaho in the Graduate Admissions Office, and in my mind, all universities were set up the same way as we were, such as centralized graduate and undergraduate admissions. We perform all the credential evaluation. We, if you wouldn't mind going back to the next slide so I can present the university first. University of Idaho is a public university, land grant research, and it's located in Moscow, Idaho. It's an old university. We actually work in the oldest building on campus. The enrollment is around 10,000, 11,000. Main campus is Moscow, but there are some satellite campuses. International admission for both grad and undergrad, it's close to 800 students. We probably have about half of that. The main unit that we work in is the College of Graduate Studies, where the Graduate Admissions Office is located, the undergraduate admissions, separate office, separate building. Law school, they conduct their own admissions. We also have an accredited intensive English language program, which allows us to extend conditional admission to international students, and an international programs office. So these would be generally the offices and stakeholders that we work with to coordinate on some admissions policies. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So the Graduate Admissions Office is centralized. We have over 90 graduate programs offered. Main focus is on natural resources, engineering, and education. We are expecting this year to have an intake of about 3,000 applications, and about 45% of those are international. So high volume for us to perform credential evaluations in-house. However, out of these 3,000 applications, not a lot of them, I would say probably 40% of them finalized, especially for international students. We do offer in-house credential evaluation. If we get stuck, if we may not have the resources to perform that evaluation, we would outsource the evaluation to a professional credential evaluation services. We have a paperless application system, just like we are using Slate. It's a CRM system that we manage. I am also a Slate captain, which has made our life tremendously easy. We are also DSO in our office, which I manage an office of 2 people and myself, where we issue the initial I-20 and transfer I-20s. Our mission is to enhance the graduate applicant experience. We have found that helps applications complete faster. Departments are able to get into contact with students at a different, more personalized level. Another mission for us is to navigate policies at the university and try to work with the College of Graduate Studies and also the Graduate Council to create procedures and align our policies with our peer institutions. And then, of course, keep up with training, which we have a limited time, but that's one of our priorities. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Oh. So thank you for listening to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
So my name is Michelle Barter. Hopefully you can all hear me. I want to thank ACRO for allowing me to be on this panel. If we can go to the next slide, I'll get started on Wichita State University. We are in Wichita, Kansas. Public urban research university. We have 8 colleges on campus, from bachelor's to PhDs. We have 16,000 students with roughly 1,700 international students from over 100 countries. Next slide, please. We are a university with 3 admissions offices. It can make it very nice and it can make it hard sometimes. We have an undergraduate admissions office who does solely domestic. So anyone who is a US citizen or a permanent resident, asylee or refugee. They don't have to deal with credit evaluation, but any transfer credit for them is done by the registrar's office. Our graduate school is kind of like Mary's, where the admissions work is done within the graduate school, and then it is farmed out to graduate coordinators within our colleges on campus. They do graduate domestic and international students. Then there's my office, which is the Office of International Education, and we do undergraduate international only and our intensive English language center program. And then our office does all transfer credit for international students or even domestic students who have international coursework. Next slide, please. I thought I would go over our office. It is more than just admissions. You can see here all the different areas. I saw on several comments on the listserv question that was presented, if someone was in a central office and if it was good or bad. That is what we are. We have everything from the Intensive English Learning Center all the way to our Immigration Student Services office. I'm in there with admissions. I have 3 admissions officers who do all in-house credential evaluations. We have gone and sent our admissions officers to the ACRO Summer Institute, and that's kind of where they get their initial training. And then we also do online webinars, use verification systems. We've had someone who was in the office for 30+ years. She retired this year, so we had to get as much from her on paper as we possibly could. And we have a very extensive country files that we have put into Microsoft OneNote to help us, especially this year with COVID, how we are all working remote. It's helped us to get all of our information in one spot. And then I mentioned we do all of our transfer credit as well and through our office. So I think that's it for me.
Hello, I'm Francesca Villa, and I thank you, ACRO, for having me on this panel, and Diana for asking the question on the listserv. As Diana knows, we are doing a similar work as they are doing now in Amsterdam. So the discussion is of main importance for me as well. Next slide, please. Just a brief introduction of my institution. IED, Istituto Europeo di Design, has 6 campuses in Italy, in Milan, in Rome, in Turin, Florence, Cagliari, and Venice, and is part of a network that includes also some schools in Brazil and in Spain. We are a private institution authorized by the Italian Ministry of Education to award first cycle and second cycle degrees in Italy, actually. And basically we have a population of almost 6,000 students with 2,000 new enrollments each year, degree-seeking students, I mean. And most of them are undergraduate students, so around 80% of the students are undergrad, and almost 20% is graduate students. The international population made up more or less the 17% of the application and the enrollment. The main fields of study at IED are design, fashion design, communication, visual arts, obviously. And as you can see, we have the programmatic accreditation since more or less 2010. And next slide, please. Our admission process is, I would say, hybrid in the sense that some of the function of the process are centralized, whether some are not. And to do this kind of structuring and to decide what was needed at a central level and what can be divided between undergraduate, postgraduate schools, we started from the definition of the international student, and we ask ourselves what makes a student international, because some people consider internationality based on the nationality of the student, some other consider the residence, some other the title, and honestly, all these make a student international, but neither definition is actually exhaustive. And for each of these features, we need to provide the student with specific help and support. That is to say that we needed to consider the title and to consider even an Italian, so let's say domestic student with a foreign title as international and cannot be dealt with by the domestic team. On the other hand, we have to consider the residence and the immigration advising that should be related to the nationality and the residence of the student. So we basically categorize the student in 4 main groups according to the nationality, the residence, and the title, and decided to centralize those aspects that needed a more uniform and transparent procedure, that is mainly the credential evaluation that is completely centralized, and the office is the registrar's office. Whereas the advising, the application, and the admission is dealt by one office, but divided within an undergraduate, postgraduate admission. So what we really wanted is that the student can have just one reference person that take him throughout the process from the application till the registration. But behind the curtains, there are the other offices that interact with the admission advisors for specific functions. And in this way, we can help the student understand better the process, because the student can speak with his or her own advisor and can be, can have the, let's say, a student-centered approach. We have, as Diana was saying, more time devoted for a personal approach by the advisors, whereas less time now is devoted to the credential evaluation that is tackled by another office. And we can so streamline our resources this way, and we can also build some common and coherent recognition criteria and standardized methodology and policies, so that at all educational level, the credential evaluation follows the same guidelines. And for all levels, but also for all departments. So there is no possibility for different departments to use different criteria. And also for the information provision for the student, it is produced at a central level by my office, so that we can have this kind of uniform way of giving information to students at an institutional level. And again, basically, we try to keep up with the training of the credential evaluator, so that the credential evaluator can then train the registration staff, the admission advisors, and spread the expertise at an institutional level. Just to say, for the credential evaluation, obviously we do in-house evaluation all the time, also because in Italy we do not have credential evaluation agencies. but we can have the support of the National Information Center, that is CIMEA, so we can ask for advices, or we can ask students to ask for a statement of comparability there if it is needed. But let's say that in the admission process for us includes also the application. So now we are working on our systems in order to give the best user experience. So we are facing the same discussion that Diana was saying before. Next slide.
Okay, this takes us into our Q&A. We do have one question, reminding you once again that if you have a question you'd like to have an answer to use the Q&A section to post that question. And if it's a question for a specific presenter, to designate who you're asking that question to. We have a question from Angela, and she wants to know, for those of you doing in-house credentials evaluation, how many evaluators do you employ? So, panelists, who would like to answer? Okay, Polly.
Our office was just restructured. Currently, I am the most experienced credential evaluator right now and training 2 staff. Very eager to learn, but also aware that there is a steep learning curve. We sometimes feel that we need to outsource some of our most challenging credential evaluations. However, in the past 4 years, what I've been trying to do is build up our database of sample transcripts, and also build up our database of online credential verification. And this has helped tremendously in us being able to verify, at least at the application stage, to verify credentials and authenticate credentials. And we, of course, we also work very hard on the degree equivalency, which is very important for the application process. But one thing that has helped us tremendously, especially to reference sample documents, is our current CRM slate. We are able to, whenever we have a document from a school that we have not really worked with, to find that document in Slate. So we are using Slate also as a database for sample documents. We're trying to be as consistent as possible in watching webinars. Credential evaluations is one of my passions, so I'm trying to be plugged into all the resources that are available out there.
Thank you, Polly. Anybody else?
Hello. I have 3 admissions officers, and then I can do it as well.
We have 2 at the graduate level at Georgia State, but there is, I believe it's 1 undergraduate with some cross-training going on at the undergraduate level.
Oh, and yet I'm the main credential evaluator, and then there is a second credential evaluator specifically for China.
Wow, we all have really small staff. I have 8. And they're only for undergraduates, imagine. We do all the in-house. We have a bit the same as in Italy. If we have problems with the credential evaluation, we don't know it anymore. I mean, then we have the NAFEC, our NICNERIC center, who can support us. But we do everything ourselves, yeah.
Can you just, Diana, just mention to the audience who might not know what the NICNERIC center and NAFEC is?
Oh, that's a good question. I know what they are. In Europe, I think every country, correct me if I'm wrong, Francesca, we have a national center which supports us in internationalization and supports incoming students and outgoing students, and set rules and advices about how to evaluate. Well, in the Netherlands, they are very hooked to the law. So we're allowed to diverse from it, but their advice can also be used legally. So that's the Enigmatic Center, and there. I don't know that, Francesca, but the UK is a bit like the leader of the gang, aren't they? The UK NERIC?
I wouldn't say that, but the point is also that each state has the National Information Center, but they have a different role in each country. So each country decided if the National Information Center is advising or has, for example, I think, if I'm not wrong, that in Netherlands, their statements are binding. In Italy, they are not. So it's just advising, but the authority is the institution. So the institution can decide not to agree with what we decide to do. And basically, they were created together with starting from the Lisbon Recognition Convention and then the Bologna process. So all the members have a national information center, but they deal differently with credential. That is to say that some just give information about higher education, and some other work with secondary education credential and higher education credential. So it really depends on the country.
It does indeed, and that, but that also makes why we don't have like ACRO or other organizations in Europe.
I would invite the US for that.
Yeah.
So ACRO and TISAP are really, really great support for the stuff. I mean, in the US, I think, but also for us.
True.
All right, thank you very much for that. That was, I'm sure, very informational to a lot of us. Mary, I'm gonna ask you this, but I don't know if this is true for any of the others. But you said that some of the graduate programs require credential evaluation from an agency. Just a question, do they each choose which agency? Is it one agency that all those departments are required to use? Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah, no problem. Well, first of all, Georgia State as a university, if we use any professional evaluation firm, it has to be a NACES member institution. So we do require the NACES membership. And then for certain programs, they do specify, our College of Education has 5 different professional evaluation agencies that they will accept. And then School of Public Health has one. And then the other, the School of Nursing, they also will only accept certain firms, certain professional agencies, all of which are NACES member institutions, but it has to be for those programs from one of those particular designated agencies.
Thank you.
Sure.
Leslie, do we have any other questions there that you?
Well, we actually have several questions in the Q&A section.
Yep.
So I'm just scanning here. Sorry, let's take me a second. You guys gave a lot of excellent questions.
Yes, they did. Rachel.
Okay. Rachel Webb, we both zeroed in on Rachel's question. She says, our institution is restructuring our graduate school, which currently does all graduate admissions, and our international undergraduate processor retired in July with no transitions plans. We are not aware of what the university will decide, but what are your suggestions for getting through a restructure, training staff on credential evaluation with very limited financial resources, and staying sane? So we'd be glad to hear from the panel on this, but if attendees would like to enter your comments into the chat, this is an interesting question. Anybody from the panel have
Holly?
Feelings about this?
If I make a suggestion, so number one thing would be to reach out to the credential evaluation community. There are a lot of free resources, and make sure you list all of them and make them available, and encourage everyone to reach out. there are a lot of international credentials forums out there, and also create a list, an ongoing list of what approach you want to take and be as consistent as possible. So if you are consistent, it's easier to justify and understand some decisions. And just do research. There are a lot of online verification of credentials. There are resources, and everyone is willing to share.
I'd have to agree with all of what Polly said. I would also advocate for a membership with Acro Edge. That helps us tremendously.
I agree with everything y'all just said as well. Reaching out to the community and Acro Edge membership is a must-have,
yes,
in my opinion, for doing this job. And one of the things I did when I took over is I reached out to some of my colleagues in the state, like Georgia Tech and University of Georgia. And I just went and met with them, the people who do what the credential evaluations or manage it, and just to understand better how they do it, what's their process, what do they accept. So, and like you said, keeping that list and getting the database going and reaching out. There's a lot of organizations that will help and a lot of resources online.
I think I saw a question possibly in the chat that didn't make it into the Q&A, and that was, what are your ideas about getting your credential evaluators trained? If you've got beginners on your staff, how do you go about getting training for them? Because as we know, this is a job you can't do by winging it, right? I mean, many of us have come up through our own education system, and we have these assumptions on which we base our admissions decisions, but you can't make those same assumptions when you're doing international admissions and credential evaluation. So just kind of throwing it out there to the panel, how do you get your staff trained up? What do you do? What resources do you use? What training programs have you taken advantage of in the past?
If I may answer, I'm sorry, Michelle.
Go ahead and go.
We that's one of the advantages of an NECNERIC, especially the ones we have in the Netherlands. They have trainings to get a credential evaluator going. So that's actually the first thing we do. We send them on training there to get the general idea. And then we, of course, have a lot of documents and examples and steps how to evaluate. And but this is mainly undergraduate, because I think personally for graduate admission, it's a bit more difficult, because you have to know what quality the university is, or higher education where somebody comes from, and therefore it's mainly experience. So for the undergraduates, it's for us pretty easy, because we have this training in the Netherlands from the NUFIC, and for the graduates, it's different. We just have them walk with us on the office and trying to learn from we start with the easy countries. Germany is an easy country for us, and then work the way until the more difficult. The USA is the most difficult one for us, actually, so.
Any other comments from panelists?
Well, just to say, for us, it's the same. I mean, we have just had the micro-credential course by Shimea, which is the same kind of center as the NAFIC for credential evaluators. So we get the basics and more than the basic for the course. And during the course, we thought about a sort of network at a national level, an association that can help professionals share best practice, because it's mainly a question of experience and a structured archive. I would say you have to keep all the samples or the resources, because it's really a research-based work. So the better you structure your resources, the better you can go to them as an example for future evaluations. And the CHIMEA Center is really a support for us and for young people who start this job.
I mentioned before the Summer Institute that ACRO has. I went to that just a month or two after I had started, and it was a little overwhelming, but it was very beneficial. My advice would be, if you have staff who are in your office who have already learned some of this, is to learn from them, sit down and watch them and see what your university policies are, because the one number thing I would say I learned is every institution is different. So experience is key, but you also need to know what your institution does. But that week-long Summer Institute that ACRO has for international is very helpful, along with everything in EDGE. We also reach out to Education USA in each country, to those REACs, and we get help from them on a constant basis, especially when someone says we can't get you what we need, then we can get consistent answers from them as well. And samples, like they said, we have a file, like I said, for every country, and samples and what we've done for each student and what we've learned.
Jump in on that too. If you're not able to go to a training session like that ACRO might offer, and I know TICEP does a certification as well, but one of the things I did, I was the sole evaluator for a few months there when someone left our group. And then when we hired our new person, she came from within our organization, but I created a training doc. I kind of went to NAFSA, actually. They had an existing kind of a credential evaluation checklist. So I tweaked it and made that was more appropriate, in line with Georgia State and what we need and accept and are looking for. And I created a little checklist and a training manual that we are keeping now, and hopefully it will keep getting updated and be there in perpetuity for future people. And we too are trying to build a database. We aren't quite there yet, like a lot of you guys are, but we're trying to build that country database. Here's what we'll accept. Here was our thought process with these that are a little bit unusual, so that people coming behind us will benefit from what we've gone through when we've tried to figure out some of these more unusual cases. So building a training manual, and with examples too, we did the same thing. We had samples from the countries that our top countries to say, this is what you should look for, that type of thing. So.
Thanks. I wanted to follow on something you touched on, Mary, and that is that TICEP has a foundation certificate program for international credential evaluators. So once new credential evaluators have gone through a certain number and breadth of training programs, they can sit for an exam that tests their knowledge and assures a certain level of skill in international credential evaluation. So that the TICEP's foundation certificate is a really good program to think about sending your international staff through to get trained up. I have a question too that just came through a few moments ago about structure. And this comes from Robert Prather, my colleague at TICEP. He says, it seems to be much easier to think about centralizing undergraduate international, but graduate international is a different beast. It seems to be a very difficult thing to have a centralized approach to graduate international admissions decisions. However, centralized graduate international credential evaluation is much more realistic. Do you agree with that? For those of you who do graduate admissions.
If I may, if I may answer, yes. I'm trying to so the structure that we have at the University of Idaho, it's been inherited and it's been tested and it's been proven to work. We do have a centralized admissions system where departments are, so we gather all the documents, we organize the application, we send out complete applications for review and process those decisions as they come through. Generally, faculty, they are relying on our evaluations. We may sometimes have faculty from those specific countries where we review credentials from, and they have great input that we will later use. But I would say that I don't have experience with undergraduate admissions, but I would say that the system that we have in place works. We review both domestic and international credentials, if that makes sense. And that actually works in applying the same policy to both types of credentials. So I'm not sure if I can bring a lot of light in this, just by saying that the system that we have in place works. And I cannot actually see it working in a different way.
I can jump in too. I mean, I agree exactly with what you said, Robert. Undergraduate, from an admissions overall standpoint, is easier to be centralized. But when you're talking about graduate school, you've got someone that's trying to enter a certain PhD program or a master's program. There's a lot of different faculty and a lot of other factors that go into the decision to accept that student. So that's hard to centralize. But the credential evaluation piece, especially as the way we do it, we're looking for a equivalency to a 4-year US baccalaureate degree. So that's across the board, and is easy to centralize. We can have certain things we're looking for. There may be some questions I might take to the faculty depending on what comes in, but that's really rare. It's easy to have a centralized approach from an institutional standpoint, and that's what we've set up over the past few years at Georgia State for the credential evaluation from a degree equivalency. Transfer credit and course by course analysis at the graduate level is also a little more difficult, and that happens more at the program level. So I agree with you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you guys for commenting on that. We only have a little bit more time, but we had an interesting question again from Robert Prather. He says, another important consideration about structure. What are the pros and cons of having the international credential evaluation and/or admissions function attached to the international office or to the domestic admissions office? So I know that each of our panelists had some variations in the way they've structured. Is it important? Is it crucial to you to have that process attached to one or the other, the domestic or the international admissions office?
Well, the University of Amsterdam doesn't have an international office. But we do have a domestic admissions office. So we're tied to the domestic admissions office. And yeah, some of the graduate schools have international offices, but we don't have a centralized one. So that's why we're tied to the domestic admissions office. And I think, depending, of course, what you think an international office is, I think both should be at once. I hear, a lot of times I hear Francesca, I think Michelle said it, that they had admissions advisors, something. I don't really know what their role is, but that sounds like a good idea to have like an orange and peel around the credential evaluators who pick up everything, even if they're domestic or international office, if they're called one of the two. So I think it should be together anyway, even though we just have one.
For Wichita State, it's definitely a plus to have it separate. The domestic office receives over 20,000 applications, and they don't have the time to sit there and research a country and research a credential, and they don't have the cultural aspect in mind. I had 12 years experience in the domestic world before I came to international, and it's a whole different beast. And I'm not sure I can wrap my mind one day on a US ACT score and a very easy transcript and then go to a board certificate from a different country. So, and maybe that's just because I'm used to it at our university.
That separation is important for you, Michelle. It just keeps your brain on course.
Especially with the numbers they have, there's no way they would have the time.
Interesting.
I agree. I think the size of the institution matters. My approach would be, I started training on both the domestic and international, and I feel that working on both type of credentials offers the same attention and unifies that process, and same application, institution's policy would apply to both. I separate the application process from the international and visa process. So all applicants are going to be treated consistently from the standpoint of admission and eligibility for funding. I feel that for the application stage, domestic and international can be definitely together, and then for the post-admission processes, only at that time the International Programs Office would actually need to be involved. Across training, it's important in understanding, how should I put it? So I come from an international education system, and my staff doesn't. However, we meet in the middle, and it just really helps in understanding everyone's challenges. And domestic applications are not always easy either, especially at grad level. So I would always advocate for cross-training and having just an overall approach to credential evaluation, because the way we understand a degree equivalency is through the US education system.
All right. Oh, please do.
Yeah, as I was saying before, I think also that domestic and international admission advisors should work together, I mean, in the same office, because it depends on what you consider international. So basically we have the international advisor who deal with the immigration advising, for example, so based on the residence and the nationality. But the credential evaluation is made only on the internationality of the credential. So basically they work together, because we have seen also a growth of number of Italian students having international credentials. That is why if you create some clusters based only on one criterion, that is the nationality, or that is the nationality of the title, you cannot meet all the needs of the student, in my opinion.
As the world becomes more mobile, we've got students studying increasingly in other countries besides their own. Do we have any final comments? We've reached 9. In fact, we're at, 9 my time, 9:02, 2 minutes after the hour. Any panelists, would you like to make any final statements? Okay. I would like to thank all of you for joining us and getting this interesting and lively conversation going. I am so sorry we didn't make it to all the questions actually that came up in the Q&A. So clearly this is a topic that everyone is interested in and that has an effect on all of our jobs. So I'm hoping that in the future we can keep this conversational thread going. But again, thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know that everyone's wearing a lot of hats these days and working under different pressures than we might have been a year ago. So we appreciate your time and your expertise. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Julia.
All right, thank you all. I'd just like to emphasize that this is one of the most valuable aspects of both ACRO and TISEP, this network of colleagues that we can call upon to support each other, especially now. So I just want to give you a little reminder of all that we have coming up. Summer, if you could advance the slide. There are lots of opportunities for you to engage with ACRO, particularly in our EDGE group. We're always looking for new authors for our country profiles. If you're interested in that, please send an email of interest to edge@acro.org. We also have a fellowship program that was mentioned briefly in the chat by someone. This works with the International Education Standards Council, and there's information on this slide about the deadlines for submission, the announcement, and then the duration of it. It's an 18-month fellowship, and you will learn a tremendous amount. In fact, if you're interested in learning more about that, we did a webinar, I believe, on Tuesday that you can find on our website, a coffee break on the International Fellows webinar. And finally, next slide. We also have the Gloria Nathanson Research Fund for International Education. This you can apply to, and we award funds up to $1,000. Granted, we're not traveling so much right now, but it can cover research material, other direct costs that are related to international research. And there's just some examples of some of the projects that we would fund. Next slide. And finally, we'd ask you to stay informed at ACRO and at TISEP. You can join the EDGE mailing list for ACRO, the International Activities Listserv, and you can subscribe to the ACRO Connect newsletter. With a TISEP membership, and this year the membership was really worthwhile in that it covered your conference registration as well, you get access to all sorts of things. And these are tremendous resources. The member directory, the resources, the webinars, the TISEP at your desk, as well as the TISEP listserv. Next slide. And then here's a few more upcoming webinars that we are doing and coffee breaks that we're doing at ACRO. We have a monthly EDGE user group meeting. So those of you who said that they subscribe to EDGE, this is a great way for you to connect and interact. And on December 3rd, our own Ann Koenig is going to give a webinar on Uzbekistan 2030, the Silk Road to internationalizing higher education. That's it for us. We hope to see you all virtually again soon. Thank you for joining us and have a rejuvenating weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, all.
Thank you all.